Welcome to Module 2. In this module, we will explore how to engage the learner by planning for and implementing authentic tasks and the universal design for learning in order to reduce classroom management issues. When you pause the video to reflect upon the prompting questions, consider the ways in which you can provide guidance and support to your FSL educators. The strategies and activities suggested in this module are intended for FSL students in all grades across all programs. For a more comprehensive explanation of these suggested strategies and activities, refer to the glossary of terms at the end of the document. Most of the tasks and strategies shared in this module can easily be applied to distance learning using the technology tools and platforms approved by your board. There are 4 main goals for this module. We are developing an understanding of the learner's interests, skills, needs, and strengths. We are implementing the universal design for learning to provide supports and tools for every student. We are engaging the students through the use of action-oriented, meaningful tasks. And finally, we are implementing effective instructional strategies with the goal of achieving success for all. The learner profile is important in the FSL context as it enables educators to gather information about a student as second language learners. As FSL learners, student preferences, skills, strengths, and needs may differ from their first language learning experiences. For example, in their first language, a student may prefer to present learning in discussions in small groups. However, in the FSL classroom, the student may prefer to record their thinking before sharing. Diagnostic assessments are the foundation through which educators begin to understand the strengths and needs of their students. In FSL, an example of a diagnostic assessment could involve having an interaction in French with the students to see how well they can communicate. The educator could also have the students complete small oral or written tasks such as counting, describing images, reading aloud, or responding to questions to determine their proficiency level in French. This pre-assessment can be recorded by using a checklist or by taking anecdotal notes in order to help guide instruction. Learning students' interests help to create a sense of community and help the educator to develop lessons based on students' likes. This can be determined by using get-to-know-you activities and games where students interact in French, such as through the use of surveys, bingo, or trouve quelqu'un qui, find someone who. Some of these activities are further defined in the glossary of terms. By fostering students' previous experiences, educators can build upon what students have already learned to help them move forward. For example, having students brainstorm or complete le tableau SVA, KWL chart at the beginning of a task can help determine what students already know and have learned. The students can use simple sentences, words, or images to express their ideas. Supporting the student's mental well-being is vital to a student's readiness to learn. Providing French ambiance music, breathing techniques, calming strategies, zones of regulation, and regular check-ins with students will help students to self-regulate. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. Multiple intelligences is another important component of the learner profile. Students need to understand how they learn best as second language learners so that educators can ensure that lessons address the various ways that students learn. The Differentiated Instruction Scrapbook from EduGains provides strategies for responding to the learning preferences, interests, and readiness of individual learners. Some examples include using a song to teach new vocabulary, having students physically follow directional instructions, or displaying images to support their understanding of classroom expressions. Collaborating with the school team, such as the homeroom educator, support staff, and parents, will also help the educator to better understand the student's interests, strengths, and needs. as well as develop a positive student-educator relationship. The FSL and school leads can support this process for co-planning by coordinating learning opportunities between homeroom and FSL educators. Involving students in the process of establishing norms, routines, and expectations will help reduce classroom management issues. Rules and expectations should be visible, reviewed regularly, and written in clear, simple French. In the case of an FSL itinerant educator, it is important to find opportunities to echo the expectations of the homeroom classroom. This supports consistency and positive transitions for students and builds collaboration between first and second language contexts. To further reduce classroom management issues, building positive relationships is essential in an FSL class. Taking the time to make personal connections with students will help the educator to reach even the most difficult students. Students will be more engaged when they feel valued and understood. Implementing strategies, like the ones mentioned to support a student's mental well-being, can help to resolve challenging situations as they arise. It is also helpful for the FSL educator to find opportunities to initiate clubs or lead teams to support relationship building outside of the classroom. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. The Universal Design for Learning offers all students an equal opportunity to succeed and provides flexibility in the ways students access material, engage with it, and show what they know. Using assistive tools, such as digital devices, speech-to-text software, and headphones will help support students' language learning needs. There are a number of online tools that support the reading and writing of sentences in French. It is beneficial when students are involved in creating a flexible and differentiated learning environment, such as flexible seating and varied groupings, in order to promote discussions and social interaction. For itinerant educators, a flexible learning environment may involve collaboration with the classroom educator to create alternative seating arrangements or groupings to maximize interaction during French. When possible, it is good practice to have students line up outside of the homeroom classroom when it is FSL time, so that the alternate seating arrangements signal the beginning of French learning. Listening is the foundation through which language learning happens. Students need to be able to hear the language repeatedly before they can speak, read, or write about it. In order to develop language skills, it is important for students to be exposed to a variety of voices, accents, and audio text types. Students' needs are considered during listening tasks by adjusting purpose, complexity, accent, and pace as suggested in the French as a Second Language Listening to Learn document from EduGains. It is important to support the differentiation of process, where students acquire knowledge in a variety of ways, such as through oral, written, or drama activities. Differentiation of content should be based on students' interests. When we differentiate products, the students are able to demonstrate their understanding in different formats, such as through a video, poster, or writing task. Purposeful and explicit differentiation is a necessary step to supporting student confidence and engagement in FSL. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Communicating clear, realistic, and attainable learning goals in student-friendly French language will help the students to have a clear vision of what they are learning. Creating clear and concise success criteria with student input will enable the students to understand what skills they need to demonstrate to achieve the learning goal. Success criteria should be written using familiar French words and images to support students' understanding of the expectations. A language-rich learning environment provides the tools for students to use the language successfully. This can be achieved with anchor charts, personal visual dictionaries, word walls, word banks, prompting questions, and authentic texts readily available to the students. The explicit teaching of clarification strategies is imperative in the second language classroom. Examples of phrases include Je ne comprends pas, répétez s'il vous plaît, parlez lentement, and pardon. These strategies support students to clarify understanding and develop proficiency. The module Learner Autonomy and Metacognition from Transforming FSL states that students need to be explicitly taught the process of learning a language in order to enable them to take responsibility for their learning. Therefore, it is important for students to take ownership of their learning by setting goals for their next steps and engaging in self-reflection. Students should consistently reflect on the strategies they have used when listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These strategies should be posted in the classroom and referenced often so that metacognition is continuously supported in FSL. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. According to a framework for French as a second language in Ontario schools, student engagement supports confidence and proficiency in FSL. The module, The Action-Oriented Approach from Transforming FSL, emphasizes the need for students to engage in purposeful acts which are set in a context that students could face in everyday life in a variety of situations. Authentic, action-oriented tasks actively involve learners in meaningful communication, where students use verbal and nonverbal cues to communicate a message. Messages are spontaneous, not simply memorized, and require students to consistently negotiate understanding and communicate as they interact. The target language structures and vocabulary required for the tasks can be supported by developing co-created anchor charts and visuals, either digital or on chart paper. An example of an action-oriented task could involve an end-of-the-year pizza celebration. In this task, students must use an online menu to purchase a pizza and drinks that respect their group's preferences and a $25 budget. This task is action-oriented because there is a goal and spontaneous, authentic prompts, such as, sorry, we aren't accepting cash, or we don't sell lemonade. The students engage in discussions in French in order to meet the likes and dislikes of everyone within their group. An example of a pizza activity that is not action-oriented would be to have students express the type of pizza they like. In this case, the students would simply memorize the question and sentence starter. Quel type de pizza aimes-tu? J'aime une pizza au fromage. Each group conversation would be virtually identical, as students simply substituted pizza toppings within a structured sentence. Student choice and voice are very important for student engagement. A choice board is a graphic organizer that consists of different squares. Each square represents an activity. Students are able to select different tasks that appeal to their interests. Students can be instructed to choose and complete one or more activities in each strand of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Real-world connections support students in seeing the use of French as purposeful outside of the classroom, while modeling language through the use of authentic audio and written text. TV5 Mondes, La Monde en Marche, IDELO, and News in Slow French are examples of websites which connect learners to current events at a developmentally appropriate level. Some of the audio texts from these sites may appear fast for the beginner learner. However, with more repetition, in addition to an emphasis on listening for familiar vocabulary and phrases, students will begin to feel more at ease. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Students need to hear and read authentic French texts. The selection of texts should expose the learner to authentic vocabulary in a variety of text forms. In the pizza example above, authentic texts might include restaurant menus, online food reviews, and audio recordings that model conversations of ordering foods at a restaurant, by phone, or online. Authentic texts not only engage students in seeing French in different real-life forms, but also act as models for vocabulary and sentence structures that would support students as they prepare for the action-oriented task. Other examples are party invitations, movie listings, song lyrics, social media posts, and opinion blogs. Technology also supports student engagement. Consider the variety of board-approved apps and web-based tools that exist in order to assist and support students as they develop proficiency in French. Interactive learning provides a more hands-on experience and supports student engagement. Active learning opportunities such as quatre coins, 4 corners, rencontre éclair, speed meeting, marcher en musique, milling to music, information exchange, pense parle partage, think pair share, scavenger hunts, escape rooms, or the amazing race are all activities that foster movement while learning. Some of these activities are further defined in the glossary of terms. The document Inquiry-Based Learning from the Ontario Ministry of Education states that inquiry-based learning places students' questions, ideas, and observations at the center of the learning experience. This approach allows students to explore their ideas and ask higher-order questions. Providing a question matrix for French, le tableau Q will encourage the students to ask questions that promote critical thinking. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Effective instructional strategies support students in accomplishing tasks and meeting learning goals successfully. French needs to be the language of communication in the FSL classroom. It is important to maintain the integrity of the language. If instructions are provided in French and the English translation follows, then learners have less opportunity to develop vocabulary or critical thinking skills to process their new language. Using visuals, gestures, actions, and facial expressions are proven methods that help students to understand the target language. The FSL classroom should focus on accountable talk, where the students are thinking about what their peers are saying and responding and reacting in a meaningful way. Authentic daily oral communication enables the students to engage in everyday uses of the French language, as outlined in the document, Teaching and Learning in the Core French Classroom. In this document, the strategies that are listed for oral interaction can be used in any FSL context, regardless of program. Students need to be able to hear and speak the language repeatedly before they can begin to read or write about it. There needs to be an increase in student talk time and a decrease in educator talk time. Establishing a wait time will allow for students to think about their response and process the language. At the early stages of language proficiency, it is normal for students to communicate using short, isolated words and phrases with frequent pauses and hesitations, specifically during spontaneous interactions. Learning to authentically communicate in a new language requires both rehearsed and spontaneous interactions. Contextualized vocabulary acquisition means that the vocabulary and language structures that are being taught and practiced in class have a purpose and are connected to the action-oriented task. In order for students to successfully speak the French language, the vocabulary needs to be repeated, reused, and reinforced. Repetition, gestures, actions, games, activities, visual supports, songs, videos, sentence starters and co-created anchor charts are some strategies to practice and learn the required vocabulary. Celebrating what the students can do will help build students' confidence and competency in using the French language, as suggested in the module Oral Proficiency from Transforming FSL. It is helpful to develop I can or je peux statements to highlight what the students are able to do. The oral self-assessment wheels from the Barrie Region CFR project outline the oral communication skills that students are able to do at the various CEFR proficiency levels. As students progress on the wheel, students become more comfortable using the language. The philosophy of the CEFR is embedded within the FSL curriculum and positions language proficiency according to specific levels. The CEFR and CEFR proficiency levels are further defined in the glossary of terms. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Gradual release of responsibility is the process of scaffolding the learning of the vocabulary and language structures. The educator begins with model practice, then continues with shared practice, engaged with students, then guided practice with educator feedback, and finally independent practice, where students are interacting without teacher support. We cannot expect the students to use the language if they have not had time to practice it gradually. When we explicitly teach learning strategies for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, students are able to determine which strategies work best for themselves to support their understanding. Students can self-reflect upon the success of the learning strategies that they have applied by using a self-reflection checklist. Intercultural awareness and sociolinguistic conventions are unique components of the FSL curriculum. Intercultural awareness focuses on developing the student's exposure to, understanding of, and respect for diverse French-speaking communities around the world. For example, core French students in grades 4 are exposed to French-speaking communities in Ontario, whereas students in grade 9 are exposed to French-speaking communities in Africa and Asia. Sociolinguistic conventions focus on developing students' understanding of the accents, dialects, words, and phrases that are used in specific contexts and/or cultures. For example, the use of vous is used when referring to a group of 2 or more people, but it is also used to express politeness in more formal situations. Explicitly teaching sociolinguistic understanding is a key component in developing student proficiency. It is important to note that French culture should not be taught in isolation, but rather is intended to be a study of our interconnectedness and interdependence as a global community. Intercultural awareness includes more than a list of celebrations and symbols. Students develop a deeper understanding of the lived experiences of other cultures if it is incorporated into everyday language learning, as indicated in the module Interdependence of Language and Culture. Idelo and Ça Bouge are examples of websites that expose students to French culture from around the world. Organizing varied groupings and cooperative activities allows students to work, speak, and learn with others, as outlined in the document Cooperative Learning from Transforming FSL. These activities facilitate a variety of interactions where students can practice and repeat learning with varied partners and in varied groupings. Some examples of cooperative activities are pense, parle, partage, think, pair, share, quatre coins, 4 corners, inside-outside circle, jigsaw, marche en musique, mill to music, and numbered heads together. For an explanation of these activities, refer to the Glossary of Terms document. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. The 3-part lesson is also beneficial in the FSL classroom. It facilitates the process of gradual release while scaffolding student learning, which is vital as students learn a new language. For students to further develop effective communication skills in French, grammar should not be neither the focus of a learning cycle nor taught in isolation. The strategy of teaching grammar in context means that grammar structures should be relevant and connected to the action-oriented task, and also strategically introduced as needed during a learning cycle. For example, if we consider the previous pizza party task, students may need a mini lesson on verb tenses used to express a personal preference politely. Je voudrais or j'aimerais. In this example, it is not necessary to expose students to all forms of the conditional verb tenses because the goal of the task only requires them to use the je form for a specific purpose. This concept is emphasized in the document Grammar in Action from Transforming FSL. Descriptive feedback is intentional and specific and possibly communicated immediately during a task or as a reference, written or voice note, to highlight student strengths and next steps. Examples of French language feedback may include gestures, universal symbols, and mots amis, word cognates, in order to support second language vocabulary acquisition. Positive reinforcement and opportunities for student reflection should be included whenever possible. Precise and timely feedback that focus on the success criteria is key to ensuring that students understand the specific steps needed to improve their learning and understanding of the French language. See Learning for All from the Ontario Ministry of Education. For example, if the educator notices that students are consistently saying j'ai allé as they describe where they went on the weekend, this may prompt a mini lesson on the correct use of je suis allé. Because the goal is to describe where students went on the weekend, it is not necessary to introduce all the forms of passé composé, past tense, at that time. Exit tickets, whether oral or written, are not only useful in determining whether or not students have understood the concept or the learning, but also support FSL educators in planning next steps. For example, after having had students talk and read about themselves and others, the educator may choose to have students use a sticky note to respond in writing to a related question prompt, such as, Qu'est-ce que tu aimes et pourquoi? In analyzing the responses, the educator can look for specific trends, such as whether or not the students understand the written form of j'aime, the use of parce que, or even the range of vocabulary. This can help educators identify what specific grammar and vocabulary needs to be further explored within the learning cycle. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Your voice and feedback support the development of future professional learning series. Please take a moment to complete this survey with your team. Should you have any questions about this module, please send an email to omlta@omlta.org. These modules have been created under the leadership of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association, OMLTA. The OMLTA is a nonprofit professional association that has been supporting French as a second language and international languages educators of all programs and grade levels since 1886. Today, it continues to be the leader in professional learning and advocacy, inspiring and connecting Ontario's French and international languages educators. These modules were designed to support FSL teacher retention and recruitment by deepening the understanding of the directions, principles, and content of the Ontario curriculum policy documents for all three of the province's FSL programs: Core French, Extended French, and French Immersion. The OMLTA would like to thank the Ministry of Education for its financial support in developing this module. Special thanks is also extended to the educators who contributed their expertise and experience to the development of these modules.